the complete story of Ecclesiastes like you've never seen it before. What if I told you that almost everything you have been taught about success and happiness is a kind of polite illusion, a story we keep repeating so we can avoid asking what life actually means? I remember the first time I saw through it. It was not in some monastery or distant mountain. It was while watching people chase things, the next car, the next promotion, the next applause, as if the purpose of existence were to decorate emptiness. And when I thought of Solomon, the king who had everything, I saw the same pattern dressed in gold. He had wealth beyond imagination, knowledge that dazzled the wise, and yet when he looked at his life, he said something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And you see, that is not despair, it is discovery. It is the moment when the smoke clears and one realizes that all the trophies of the world cannot fill the silence that follows every victory. It is as if he climbed to the top of the ladder only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. I have met people like that, men and women with restless eyes, always about to arrive, never quite there. They think the next success will settle them, but the next only opens another empty room. That is the tragedy of the human game. We mistake movement for meaning, achievement for awakening. Solomon saw it early and tried to warn us. He said that everything under the sun, all that men pursue, is like chasing the wind, and what a marvelous image that is. Chasing the wind, the harder you grasp, the faster it escapes. The more you want, the less you have, and yet the pursuit continues, because we fear what happens when it stops. We fear stillness. But stillness is the only place where truth can whisper. Imagine for a moment that you had all that he had, every desire answered before you could name it, every pleasure at your fingertips. What then, what would be left to long for? Perhaps then you would understand the futility of endless wanting. For once you have everything, you realize you never had yourself. This is why Solomon's wisdom feels so modern. It cuts across time. It exposes the spiritual poverty of abundance. He was not condemning joy. He was simply pointing out that joy cannot be manufactured. It arises when one no longer clings, when one allows life to be as fleeting and light as breath. The Hebrew word Hevel, vapor, that is his key. I like that image very much. Vapor. It exists, yet you cannot hold it. It is real but ungraspable. And that is what all of this is. The world, your ambitions, even your identity, vapor moving through sunlight, shimmering for a moment before vanishing. And you may say, that sounds bleak, but I tell you it is liberation. For when you stop demanding permanence from what is impermanent, you begin to see the divine not as something to reach, but as something that has never left. The tragedy is not that life is fleeting, the tragedy is that we demand it. Stand still. I often think Solomon's despair was really the birth of his clarity. He saw through the glittering mirage of human striving, and behind it he glimpsed the stillness of God, the one reality that does not decay. So when he says everything is meaningless, he is not dismissing life, he is cleansing it of lies. He is sweeping away the noise so the quiet can be heard. I once asked myself what would happen if one day humanity stopped trying to fix its emptiness by adding more to it. Perhaps that would be the day of true rest, when we would finally understand that contentment is not the reward for effort, but the result of alignment. Solomon called it the fear of God. I would call it the recognition that you and the universe are not two. The same wind you chase is the breath that moves within you. The same vanity that frustrates you is the proof that you are never separate from the divine. We invent success because we cannot bear simplicity. But in simplicity there is room for the sacred. In quiet labor there is meaning enough. The more I read Ecclesiastes, the more I sense that Solomon was not tired of living, he was tired of pretending. And that is a fatigue that every thoughtful person eventually knows. The fatigue of masks, of ambitions, of perpetual comparison. When he says meaningless, he means let go, stop clutching, stop believing that accumulation will become transformation. Life does not bloom by being forced. It unfolds when you stop trying to own it. You see, the richest man in the world wrote the most devastating critique of wealth, and yet it was not cynicism, it was clarity. He was saying, wake up, you cannot build eternity out of dust, and yet you can find eternity in the dust when you stop worshipping it. That is the paradox. The vapor you chase becomes light when you stop chasing. So if you ask me what Solomon discovered, I would tell you this. He learned that God was not an answer to be reached, but a presence already breathing through his own weariness. That is why his words echo through centuries, because they tell every restless heart the same truth. Stop running, for what you seek is already here. Have you ever wondered why so much of what you call progress still leaves you hollow? Why every improvement only sharpens the edge of dissatisfaction? I ask, because that question haunted Solomon, and it haunts me too. We have built entire civilizations on the promise that more knowledge, more comfort, more control will deliver peace, and yet peace slips through our hands, like the very vapor Ecclesiastes speaks of. The teacher, Kohelet, that voice within Solomon, was not a preacher of doom, but a man who dared to look at life without anesthesia. He stripped away the polite decorations, the sacred slogans, the illusions of purpose built from public success, and he said, look honestly, everything repeats. Nothing truly new exists under the sun. Generations rise and fall. Rivers flow and return. The same laughter, the same tears, the same desires dressed in different fashions. We live inside a magnificent pattern that refuses to remember our individual names, and that realization is not cruelty. It is medicine for pride. It is the beginning of wisdom. Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes not to depress the living, but to awaken them. He had tasted every form of sweetness the world could ferment, yet found it all dissolving on his tongue. He speaks as one who has come to the edge of satisfaction and peered beyond, where silence waits. And in that silence he found not despair, but clarity. Imagine him in his later years, sitting alone amid the stones of his vast palace, the gardens blooming, servants moving quietly, musicians playing soft melodies, and yet none of it could drown the question rising within him, what remains when all of this ends? He had built monuments, collected treasures, accumulated wisdom, and still the night whispered, so what have you really gained? And that whisper is the same one that follows us through our modern lives, through glowing screens, through the clamor of productivity, through the endless noise that calls itself entertainment. What remains when the sound is gone? What remains when the likes fade and the work is finished? Solomon faced that question head on. He called the human condition by its real name, vanity, not arrogance but futility, a chasing after wind. And in doing so, he exposed a truth that few dare to face, that the meaning we manufacture out of things is too small to hold the weight of existence. He saw that the world's wisdom often contradicts itself, that righteous people suffer and the wicked prosper, that wisdom multiplies sorrow, that even laughter hides anxiety. He saw the absurdity of trying to trap permanence in the net of time. And so he declared, fear God and keep his commandments, not as a pious slogan, but as a practical conclusion. The only anchor in a world of shifting sand, Ecclesiastes is unlike any other book in Scripture because it does not rush to comfort you. It takes you into the desert of meaninglessness and lets you feel the dryness of the air until you thirst for what is real. That is the beginning of faith. Not the avoidance of doubt, but the acceptance of it as part of the journey. In the language of the spirit readings I have seen, this is the initiation every soul must undergo, the stripping of false purpose, the death of false joy, so that something eternal can breathe through you. Ecclesiastes does not give you answers. It gives you honesty. And honesty is the soil where revelation can grow. Consider how different this is from the noise of the modern age. Today, everything urges you to define yourself by achievement, by comparison, by the illusion of constant improvement. We worship the visible and ignore the invisible. We measure worth by noise, but Solomon says the real measure is silence. Can you sit with nothing and not collapse? Can you find joy when no one is watching? Can you love without needing reward? That is the field where meaning begins. I remember once reading that the teacher spoke of a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh, and I thought, yes, the wisdom of rhythm, the acceptance that life breathes in opposites, that light and shadow are partners in the same dance. We try to cling only to the bright half and wonder why we are torn apart. Solomon understood that true serenity is not found in the avoidance of pain, but in the comprehension of it. When you see that joy and sorrow come from the same source, the world stops being an enemy. It becomes a teacher, and you begin to live in alignment rather than resistance. He was not advocating detachment from life. He was teaching participation without obsession, to work, to love, to enjoy, but to remember that every blessing remains a gift, never a possession. When he says everything is vapor, he is not mocking existence. He is describing the sacred texture of reality. Nothing you hold stays still. Nothing you love remains the same. And that is precisely what makes life divine, because impermanence is the signature of the living God. To fear God, in Solomon's language, is not to tremble, but to awaken to that mystery, to recognize the limits of your grasp and the vastness of what holds you. I have often said that religion becomes poisonous when it pretends to remove mystery, but Ecclesiastes restores it. It reminds you that mystery is not a failure of reason, but the heartbeat of wisdom. The teacher calls you to humility, not humiliation, humility in the sense of alignment with reality. And reality is vast. You cannot own it, but you can move with it. And that movement, that awareness, is what Solomon calls joy, not pleasure, joy, the deep contentment of knowing your place in the dance. Now I ask you, when was the last time you sat still long enough to hear the sound beneath the sound, to feel the quiet hum of your own existence? When was the last time you stopped chasing and allowed yourself to be caught by the present moment? Ecclesiastes is an invitation to that moment, to step out from under the sun and into the light that does not set, the light of being, the light of God. The teacher whispers through centuries. You have tried everything else. Now try awareness. Try surrender. Try living as if the world is not an object but a revelation, and perhaps then, like Solomon, you will discover that what you were searching for was never lost. It was simply hidden beneath the noise of your own striving, waiting, patient, eternal, breathing in you now. Do you only realize you are running when the silence catches you? That is the question Solomon pressed upon every soul who would listen. The question that strips away the pretense of progress, because to pursue without knowing what you seek is the most elegant form of despair. Ecclesiastes confronts that despair not with comfort but with truth. Solomon had tested the full range of human pursuits: wealth, wisdom, pleasure, empire, art, women, gardens, knowledge, the entire theater of ambition. And when the curtain fell, he stood before his own success and said, "It is vapor, it is wind, it is nothing." And in that confession there is no defeat, only revelation. For he saw what few ever see, that the world itself is not designed to fill you, but to reveal you. Every desire is a mirror, showing what you still believe you lack. He had built palaces, composed songs, collected knowledge, and yet what he found was that nothing finite can satisfy an infinite hunger. He saw that the heart of man is a bottomless vessel, and when we try to fill it with temporary things, we only make the emptiness louder. This is why the word Hevel, vapor, is so powerful. It is not a curse, it is a description of reality. Everything you touch, everything you chase, it shimmers for a moment, then vanishes, and yet you spend your life reaching for it again and again, like a child trying to hold sunlight in his hand. Solomon saw that the cycle itself was the trap, that the repetition of striving had replaced genuine living, that we had become hypnotized by motion, mistaking activity for awakening. And so he asks a question that unravels the illusion: what profit is there in all the labor under the sun? Meaning, what end does all this rushing serve? You build, you gather, you celebrate, and then you vanish. And the next generation repeats the pattern. The rivers run to the sea, and still the sea is not full. How could you read that and not feel the chill of recognition? Because this is your life too. You work, you strive, you accomplish, and yet somewhere inside there is still a faint ache, something unfinished, something unhealed. And Solomon tells you plainly, it will never be healed by adding more of the same. The pattern must be broken by awakening, not accumulation. I often say that the modern soul is addicted to forward motion because it cannot bear the weight of the present, but the present is all that ever exists. Solomon was the richest man alive, yet he looked around and saw that even the rich and the poor share the same destiny. Both return to dust. He says the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness, yet the same fate overtakes them both. So what, then? Is wisdom meaningless? No. It is precious, but only when anchored in reverence, for knowledge without humility only deepens the illusion. You see this everywhere today. The clever explaining existence to the weary, as if intellect could replace spirit, but intellect without awe becomes vanity, wearing the mask of reason. Solomon's conclusion was not to abandon thought, but to surrender it to something larger, to recognize that wisdom reaches its height where it bows. I sometimes think that the teacher's greatest gift is not his brilliance, but his exhaustion, because exhaustion can be sacred when it brings you to the edge of self, when every illusion has burned away and all that remains is awareness itself. Then the question is no longer, what can I get, but what am I? And that is where the veil begins to thin. Solomon saw that man lives under the sun while God lives beyond it, and that to live without reference to the divine is to be trapped in circles. You cannot find meaning in what is transient unless you anchor it in what is eternal. This is why the book feels so unsettling, because it does not lie to you. It tells you that even laughter is madness if it ignores the silence that gives it depth. He speaks of the endless cycles of nature, of generations that come and go, of work that repeats itself, and he is not mocking creation. He is saying, do you not see this rhythm, this pattern? It is trying to teach you surrender, to show you that control is a myth. That meaning emerges not from mastery, but from harmony. I have seen people collapse under the pressure to find purpose, but Solomon offers something gentler and wiser. He says, fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the duty of man, which means live in alignment with the source, not in defiance of it. It is not a rule, it is a rhythm. The more you fight the current, the more you drown, the more you move with it, the more you see that the river itself carries you home. Now let me ask you again, what are you really living for? Not what do you say you believe, but what occupies your hours, your thoughts, your secret desires? Because whatever you pursue with your time is what you worship with your life. And Solomon discovered that worshipping vapor makes you disappear with it. When you chase what fades, you fade too. But when you align with what endures, you endure through all fading. This is why he speaks with such strange calm. He is not bitter, he is free. He has walked through every illusion and returned with simplicity. He tells you, eat, drink, and be glad in your work, for this is the gift of God, which is to say, stop waiting for heaven to begin. It is already here, hidden inside the ordinary moments you keep rushing past. I remember once hearing it said that to live rightly is to enjoy without clinging and to work without anxiety. That is the balance of the awakened soul. Solomon found it not by renouncing life, but by seeing through it. He saw that when everything under the sun is understood as vapor, you stop demanding permanence and start perceiving wonder. You stop clutching and start beholding. This is what it means to live under God rather than under the sun. It is not another world. It is the same world, seen truly, alive, transparent, and sacred. So the teacher's challenge to you and to me is this. Dare to see life without its disguises. Dare to face the emptiness and let it speak, for beyond the emptiness is not despair but depth, not nothingness but God, waiting, patient, luminous, in every breath you take. When Solomon spoke of life under the sun, I understood him not as describing a place, but a prison. a way of seeing that traps the soul inside the machinery of its own expectations. Under the sun, everything must add up. Every effort must yield. Every hour must prove its worth. And yet the more one measures, the less one lives. For to measure life is to miss it. To treat being as a ledger instead of a miracle, I have seen men devote decades to climbing that invisible ladder only to reach the top and find nothing there but thinner air. They call it success. But it is simply exhaustion disguised as meaning. This is what Solomon meant by vapor, the endless attempt to anchor yourself in things that move. And the tragedy is not that the world moves, but that you keep trying to hold it still. Under the sun, the spirit forgets itself. It begins to believe that identity is built from accumulation, that love is earned, that peace is purchased, and that God is an employer who pays according to effort. But step outside, step into what Solomon called life under God, and you find that everything remains the same, yet nothing is the same. The world does not change, but the way you touch it does. Suddenly work is not an imposition, but an offering. Bread is not a transaction, but communion. Rest is not laziness, but faith in motion. This is what mystics have always meant by the shift from doing to being. Not withdrawal from the world, but participation without captivity. For when you live under the sun, you worship results. When you live under God, you experience relationship. One is the economy of striving, the other the ecology of grace. Solomon saw both realms and suffered through their tension. He had mastered the art of getting, and yet he found that getting never ends. He looked upon his gardens, his gold, his power, and felt only the strange emptiness that follows every victory. The quiet question, now what? It is the same question that wakes modern man at 3 a.m, when the world sleeps and the applause has died. What now? And the answer is not more. It is less. It is release. It is to see that the universe is not a system to be managed, but a song to be heard. And you, the listener, are also the instrument through which it plays. Under the sun, you separate yourself from life. Under God, you return to it. I remember once standing by the sea watching the waves rise and fall, and I thought how perfectly they capture this teaching. Each wave believes it begins and ends at the shore, but in truth it is the ocean moving in patterns of form. Nothing is lost, nothing gained, only motion appearing as individuality. This is how Solomon learned to see. He realized that his kingdom, his mind, his very identity were waves in a larger tide, temporary shapes of divine energy, and to cling to them was to fight the sea itself. When he said that everything is vanity, he was not condemning creation. He was describing what happens when we mistake the temporary for the total, the part for the whole. Under the sun, we fight the rhythm of things. We resist decay. We fear death. We hoard time, and so we suffer. Under God, we move with it. We allow the dying to feed the living, the letting go to become the blessing, the ending to reveal the beginning, and suddenly the same events, the same seasons, acquire a luminous quality. The pain still comes, but it is no longer punishment. It becomes participation. The joy still fades, but it is no longer loss. It becomes transformation. Solomon's insight was not that meaning is absent, but that meaning cannot be manufactured. It can only be received. This is the essence of grace, not reward, but revelation. And it comes only when the mind stops trying to control its own salvation. Think for a moment how absurd it is that man, a creature who cannot even guarantee his next breath, spends his life trying to guarantee eternity. The teacher calls us back from this delusion. He says, you are not meant to conquer life. You are meant to consent to it. For the more you fight its transience, the more you drown in it. But the moment you let go, you float. I have often said that faith is not clinging to belief, but relaxing into trust. And that is precisely what Solomon found. Under the sun, he fought to preserve his greatness. Under God, he saw that greatness was never his to own. It was a reflection of something vast, moving through him. He came to see that the divine does not demand suffering, it demands surrender. The surrender of the illusion that you stand apart, the surrender of control, the surrender of your little sunlit room where only what can be counted counts. And when that surrender happens, The veil lifts. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. You wake one morning, pour water into a cup, and realize that you are witnessing creation, not because you have changed the world, but because you have changed your sight. That is what it means to live under God. It is to realize that heaven was never somewhere else. It was always the space between breaths, the quiet pulse beneath the noise, and that everything you tried to possess was already yours in the act of perceiving it. Solomon's wisdom is the invitation to return to wonder, to exchange analysis for awe, to trade the false light of ambition for the real light of awareness. So I ask you, are you still living under the sun, where every value depends on proof and every joy must be justified? Or will you step outside into the boundless air where the sun itself becomes a symbol, not a ceiling, where life is not a project but a participation? Under the sun, man is a worker trying to finish creation. Under God, he is a dancer moving to a music that never ends. And when you hear that rhythm, truly hear it, you realize what Solomon meant all along, that to fear God is to finally stop fearing life. The tragedy of our time is not that we are lost, but that we are running in circles. The faster we move, the more it feels like progress, and the more exhausted we become without ever arriving. I have watched this rhythm play out in cities filled with light and noise, in faces pressed against glowing screens searching for the next signal of validation. And I thought, this is the very treadmill Solomon warned of, the endless pursuit of satisfaction that cannot be satisfied. Our age is built upon it. Every advertisement whispers the same prayer in reverse. You are not enough until you buy, achieve, experience something new, and so we obey, convinced that meaning waits just one step ahead. But the moment we reach it, the promise evaporates, and the ache begins again. Solomon saw this cycle in his own time, though it was gilded with gold instead of glass. He had wealth that no one could match, wisdom that could silence any court, and pleasures that filled the palace. Yet he said, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired, and still it was vanity, a chasing after the wind. Imagine that the man who had everything confessing that he possessed nothing, because possession itself was the illusion. Under the sun, everything is conditional, temporary, dependent upon comparison. The joy you feel today dissolves when you see someone else with more. The peace you gain from one achievement fades when the next goal appears, and so you keep running, you keep building ladders that reach only to the same ceiling. This is what I call the treadmill myth, the illusion that motion equals meaning, that achievement is the cure for emptiness. But emptiness is not a hole to be filled. It is a signal to awaken. Solomon did not advise the world to abandon work. He simply told us to stop working for the wrong master. He said, eat, drink, find satisfaction in your toil, for this is the gift of God. Meaning, stop chasing life and begin receiving it. Stop fighting the current and begin flowing with it. You see, the wisdom of Ecclesiastes is not pessimism. It is clarity. It removes the glitter so that truth can shine. It tells you that joy is not a reward for effort, but a byproduct of alignment. When you align your labor with love, your work becomes worship. When you align your rest with trust, your limits become freedom. When you align your gratitude with awareness, every moment becomes sacred. That is the real alchemy of living under God rather than under the sun. Gratitude converts time into meaning, service converts work into communion, and the Sabbath, the art of sacred pause, converts your limitation into liberty. These are not religious ideas. They are psychological laws of being. The soul cannot live on tension alone. It needs rhythm. It needs rest. It needs remembrance. But the world has taught you to despise stillness, to fill every pause with noise, every silence with information. And so the voice of wisdom is drowned beneath the hum of productivity, but the soul keeps its own scorecard. And it is not impressed by your achievements. It only asks one question: were you present? Because presence is what turns experience into life. You can have the whole world and never truly live a single day If your mind is always elsewhere, chasing the next moment instead of inhabiting this one, Solomon's insight pierces through the centuries. He tells you that the cure for futility is not escape, but embodiment. To eat and drink with awareness, to work with joy, to rest without guilt, to see the divine. In the ordinary, that is what it means to receive life as a gift. And I tell you, the restless ones, the anxious ones, the overachievers who think peace comes after the finish line, you are not failing because you feel restless. You are being summoned. The ache you carry is not a defect. It is a compass. It points you away from illusion toward reality, away from performance toward presence. In the readings I have seen and in the hearts I have known, the soul is never content with repetition that lacks revelation. It longs for depth. And the more you ignore that longing, the louder it will become. You can silence it for a while with entertainment or distraction, but it always returns, because what it wants cannot be purchased, what it seeks cannot be upgraded. The soul seeks alignment with its source, and until that alignment happens, no success will satisfy. When Solomon says that enjoyment is the gift of God, he is not describing indulgence, he is describing consciousness, the ability to see life not as property but as participation, to enjoy without ownership, to receive without greed, to labor without vanity. That is joy, that is freedom. I once met a man who told me he could never rest because there was always more to do. I told him, "You will die with your list unfinished." And he laughed until he realized it was true. The world does not need more doing, it needs more being. Solomon's call is not to quit life, but to quit chasing it, to stop treating joy as a goal and begin treating it as a state that emerges when you stop resisting, when you eat simply, when you speak truthfully, when you work with sincerity. You discover that God's gift was never hidden, it was simply overlooked. We keep trying to fix life when life was never broken. We keep searching for meaning when meaning is already woven into the moment. Perhaps the great sin of our age is forgetfulness, the forgetting of how to receive. You have been trained to earn everything, but grace cannot be earned. It can only be accepted. Solomon's wisdom is the art of acceptance, not resignation, but recognition, that the divine is not waiting beyond the finish line, but breathing through the race itself. So stop, breathe, look around. The treadmill has no destination. Step off it, and you will see that the ground beneath your feet was holy all along. This is not retreat. It is return. Return to the quiet rhythm that beats beneath ambition, the heartbeat of gratitude, the pulse of divine life, calling you to live, not as a collector of moments, but as a witness of them. This is the gift you have been missing, the gift that cannot be taken, the gift that waits for you in every ordinary breath you dare to notice. There is a time for everything, Solomon said, and those words are among the most dangerous ever written, because once you truly understand them, you can never live the same way again. They tear away the illusion that life can be controlled or optimized. They expose the arrogance of our calendars and our clocks. We imagine that we are masters of time, yet we are only travelers moving through it. We rush to meet deadlines as though they were gates to eternity. But eternity is not later, it is now. And Solomon knew that to live wisely is not to conquer time, but to consent to its rhythm. I have often thought that most suffering is not caused by what happens to us, but by our refusal to accept when it happens. We want the harvest in the season of planting, the answers before the questions, the fruit without the patience of growth. But the universe does not yield to impatience. It moves with its own cadence. And those who cannot hear that music mistake harmony for punishment. Solomon watched the cycles of the sun, the patterns of rain, the repetition of generations, and he understood that the human heart is woven from the same fabric. There is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to embrace and a time to refrain. He did not write those lines as poetry, but as diagnosis. He saw that the disease of the human spirit is resistance, the refusal to inhabit the present moment, the obsession with escaping into the next one. To live under the sun is to wrestle with time as an enemy, To live under God is to recognize time as a teacher. Every season has a lesson written within it. The warmth of joy teaches gratitude. The chill of sorrow teaches compassion. The waiting teaches trust. The loss teaches perspective. But only if you are willing to listen. I have known people who spent their lives trying to outpace their own seasons, who built walls against change, who prayed for permanent summer, but to demand that life remain one color is to ask it to die. Solomon saw that beauty is born of transience. He said, God has made everything beautiful in its time, not in your time, not when you wish, but when the unseen order deems it so, and that is the secret the restless soul cannot bear. That peace is found not by speeding up, but by slowing down enough to see the hidden pattern unfolding before your eyes. Modern man, unlike Solomon, has lost the ability to rest. We confuse rest with laziness, stillness with failure, and so we live in permanent agitation. Yet we call it ambition. We fill the silence with noise, the space with movement, the moment with distraction, because stillness exposes the truth that our lives are not entirely our own. But Ecclesiastes invites us into that vulnerability, into the courage of surrender. It says, trust the timing, not because everything will be pleasant, but because everything will be purposeful. When you resist time, you fracture yourself. When you align with it, you are made whole. I have often said that wisdom begins where hurry ends, and Solomon was the first to say it plainly, to recognize that the rush of human ambition is often a disguise for fear, the fear that life will pass you by if you do not control it. But the irony is that in trying to control life, you miss it entirely. The truth is, life is not waiting for your permission. It unfolds with or without your consent, but meaning arises only when you join the unfolding consciously, to see what is rather than what you wish, to accept the present as the only place where God meets you. There is no revelation in the future. There is only memory in disguise. Revelation is always now. Solomon's great insight was that the same God who governs galaxies governs minutes, and that the divine pattern is not distant but immediate. When he wrote that eternity has been set in the human heart, he meant that the longing you feel for something timeless is not a flaw, it is a compass. It points you toward the awareness that every moment, no matter how small, touches the infinite. You can find eternity not by escaping time, but by entering it completely, by being so present that the boundaries between past and future dissolve, and only the pulse of being remains. Yet we keep asking, why this season? Why this pain? Why this delay? As though God owed us an explanation. But explanations are for the mind, not the soul. And the soul is not interested in logic. It is interested in transformation. If you can endure the unknown without trying to fix it, something within you expands. Patience becomes not endurance, but participation. You become part of the rhythm instead of its victim. Solomon's words are not passive. They are an invitation to wakefulness, to see that the seasons of your life are not interruptions to your purpose. They are your purpose. To resist them is to fight reality itself, and reality always wins. I remember once sitting with a man who told me he could not forgive himself for all the time he had wasted. I told him, you are measuring time the wrong way. You think of it as currency when it is actually a classroom. Every mistake was part of your education. Every delay was part of your preparation. Time is not your enemy. It is your witness, and it has been waiting for you to notice. Solomon teaches this too, that there is a time for mending after the breaking, a time for silence after speech, a time for humility after pride. You cannot skip them. You can only pass through them. And each passage, though painful, reveals something sacred about the human condition. To live wisely is to see that the seasons are not random. They are reflections of the divine order working through you, shaping you as surely as rivers shape stone. So when he says there is a time for everything, he is not giving you comfort. He is giving you permission. Permission to stop forcing what is not ready, to stop resenting what is fading, to stop fearing what must change. The river of life carries you, whether you thrash or float. But if you learn to float, you begin to see the beauty along the banks, you begin to understand that even the current that seems to drag you is also carrying you home. That is the mystery Solomon left for us. That time, once feared, becomes grace. That waiting, once dreaded, becomes wisdom. And that the passage of seasons is not the loss of life, but its unfolding, slow, precise, perfect, if only you have the courage to stay still long enough to see it. If God is just, then why do the wicked seem to prosper while the righteous struggle? That question is as old as consciousness itself, and Solomon, more than any man of his time, refused to look away from it. He had seen injustice done in courts that claimed to defend truth. He had watched the arrogant thrive and the humble fade, and in his wisdom he did not rush to excuse the contradiction. He allowed it to wound him, to pierce through his royal composure. And that wound became revelation, for it showed him that human judgment is shallow, built on the surface of appearances, while divine judgment moves beneath, silent, patient, absolute. Solomon wrote, "There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve." And though he called it meaningless, what he meant was that it defies human logic, not divine order. He understood that what you call unfairness is often the blindness of time, for the story of justice is longer than any life. The scales of heaven do not balance on our schedules, yet they balance perfectly. The teacher was not naive. He knew that many who claim faith stumble when they meet suffering, but faith that only stands when rewarded is not faith, it is transaction. And the divine does not trade in bargains. It calls for trust that endures contradiction, trust that survives silence. Under the sun, injustice seems final, because you cannot see beyond the horizon, but under God, injustice is only temporary shadow, waiting for light to expose its form. Solomon says that God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil, meaning nothing escapes the eternal eye. Every cruelty, every kindness, every deceit, every secret mercy, all of it is being gathered into the great reckoning of truth. The wicked may appear to prosper, but they prosper only in the theater of time. Their victory is confined to the illusion of immediacy. The righteous may suffer, but their suffering is never wasted. It becomes the forge of the soul, the invisible seed of something that will bloom beyond sight. I have often said that heaven measures differently than earth. What seems like loss here is often gained there, and what looks like triumph here is often wrought within. Solomon saw that clearly. He warned us not to envy the wicked, for their peace is counterfeit. It is the stillness of a calm sea hiding a storm beneath. Their laughter is brittle. Their wealth is heavy with fear, for they know, even if they pretend otherwise, that nothing untrue can last. Ecclesiastes is ruthless in its honesty. It strips away the comfortable idea that virtue guarantees prosperity. It tells you plainly that rain falls on both the just and the unjust, that the righteous man can die in his integrity while the dishonest lives long in comfort. But Solomon does not end there. He reminds you that God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. And that is not a threat, it is a promise. The promise that nothing good will go unseen and nothing evil will go unreckoned. You see, divine justice is not about punishment. It is about restoration. It is not revenge. It is correction. The universe bends toward balance because it was built from truth, and truth cannot rest in distortion. This is why Solomon says to live in fear of God, not fear as in terror, but fear as in awareness of that vast intelligence that governs all. When you live with that awareness, you no longer envy the wicked, you pity them because their apparent success is only a delay of the inevitable awakening, and you no longer despair in your suffering because you begin to sense that every trial carries meaning too deep for the mind, but not too deep for the soul. The modern world struggles with this because it worships immediacy, it wants visible fairness, visible reward, visible punishment. But the divine rhythm is subtle. It moves through generations. It writes justice, not in moments, but in eternities. Solomon's insight was not that life is unjust, but that justice is larger than life. that human eyes see only fragments while the divine gaze sees the whole. When the wicked flourish, they are being given rope to hang their delusion. When the righteous are tested, they are being refined for eternity. Both serve a purpose. Both are part of the balance. I remember once speaking to a man who told me he had lost his faith because evil people thrived while his prayers went unanswered. And I said to him, "You have not lost faith. You have only misplaced your timeline. God's justice is not absent. It is unfolding. And if you could see the whole of it, you would fall to your knees in awe, not despair." This is the message of Ecclesiastes, that the moral chaos of the world is not a sign of divine neglect, but of divine patience. Judgment delayed is not judgment denied. It is mercy in disguise, giving time for repentance, giving space for transformation, even for the wicked. And that is why Solomon learned to live without resentment. He saw that bitterness poisons only the one who drinks it, so he laid it down. And he said, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their wicked schemes. For those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land," that is wisdom, the ability to see beyond appearance into essence, to understand that prosperity without peace is failure, that suffering endured in truth is victory. When you live under God rather than under the sun, you begin to see this pattern everywhere. You stop demanding that justice be immediate. You start living in such a way that justice is inevitable. For when your heart is aligned with truth, you are already on the side that endures. The wicked live in fear of being found out, but the righteous live in the quiet strength of being known. Solomon teaches that every act matters. Every hidden thought counts, not to terrify you, but to dignify you, to remind you that your choices ripple through eternity, that your life, small as it seems, participates in the cosmic correction of all things. And that is what it means to fear God, to know that every breath carries consequence, and yet every consequence carries mercy. The world may seem unfair, but fairness was never the goal. Truth was, and truth, by its nature, will outlast every lie. So if you are suffering while others prosper, do not curse heaven, for you are standing in the furnace where gold is made. And when you emerge, you will see that what looked like loss was preparation, and that the justice of God is not delayed. It is perfect. It is working even now, in silence, in patience, in ways too deep for sight, but never too far for faith. I speak now as one who has looked long into the scroll of human understanding and seen its edges vanish into mystery. For Solomon, the son of David, the teacher of Israel, declared that with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and I have found it to be so. The mind of man hungers to know. It gathers facts, as bees gather nectar, and yet the sweetness turns bitter when knowledge is severed from reverence. For knowledge without God becomes a burden upon the soul. The heart grows weary beneath the weight of understanding that cannot heal, and the eye that sees too much forgets how to see simply. Solomon himself, though clothed in wisdom beyond any of his age, came to the end of his search and said, "No man can find out what God has done from beginning to end." He had read the stars, he had studied the order of creation, he had spoken with sages, and yet the greater his knowing, the deeper his ache, because the mystery did not shrink before him. It expanded. It surrounded him like a vast sea, and he realized that the finite mind cannot contain the infinite, even as a cup cannot contain the ocean. I, too, have stood at that shore, seeing visions of truth stretching beyond sight, and I knew that man's intellect, mighty though it seems, is but a candle flickering in the wind of eternity. Yet this realization is not despair, it is deliverance. For the spirit is freed the moment it ceases to demand mastery over mystery. The soul finds peace when it bows before what it cannot command. Solomon did not condemn learning, he sanctified it by putting it in its rightful place. He said, "Seek wisdom, but remember the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord," meaning awe, humility, alignment, the kind of reverence that makes the mind clear because it knows its limits. Many in our day mistake the accumulation of information for illumination, but knowledge is not light, It is a mirror, and without truth shining upon it, it reflects only confusion. The teacher saw that the pursuit of wisdom for its own glory leads to madness, for man begins to think himself equal with his Maker, building towers of thought as high as Babel. And when the tower falls, he calls it tragedy. Yet it was mercy that it should fall, for pride is the oldest blindness, and curiosity without devotion is the road to emptiness. I have seen this written in the Akashic records of the soul, that those who worship the mind alone are forever circling the same questions. Like moths trapped around a flame, they grow weary of mystery and yet cannot live without it. They hunger for certainty, though their hunger was meant to lead them to faith. Solomon's grief was not that he knew too much, but that he knew he could never know enough. The more he learned, the more he saw the shadows between the facts, the places where reason dissolves into wonder, where logic kneels before creation, and in that humility he found the beginning of peace. I tell you, the teacher's lament is our liberation, for to accept the limit of knowing is to enter the boundlessness of trust. Man was not made to be omniscient. He was made to be obedient to light. And light is always enough for the next step, not the entire path. God gives to each soul the knowledge it can bear and holds the rest in silence, not as cruelty but as protection, for there is wisdom too heavy for pride and truth too sharp for the unprepared heart. This is why the wise walk softly. They do not boast of what they know. They bow to what they do not. They speak with caution, knowing that revelation is not possession, it is visitation, a gift that comes and goes according to the law of divine timing. Solomon wrote that he applied his mind to know wisdom and also to understand madness and folly, but he learned that this too was chasing after the wind, for wisdom alone could not untangle the riddles of existence. Every answer led to another question. Every discovery opened another abyss, and he saw that peace cannot be built on explanation, only on relationship. For knowledge seeks control, but love seeks communion, and only communion with the divine can quiet the storm of thought. I have known seekers who filled their shelves with sacred books and their minds with doctrines, yet their hearts remained empty, because they studied truth as one studies a specimen, not as one meets a friend. Truth is not to be dissected, but to be lived. It is not the conquest of the intellect, but the surrender of the spirit. Solomon's cry echoes across the ages, reminding us that the human mind is a servant, not a master. It was given to perceive patterns, not to replace purpose. It was made to reason within faith, not apart from it. Those who build their faith on intellect alone will find themselves dwelling among ruins. For when the winds of contradiction blow, their towers crumble. But those who trust in God stand firm, because their foundation is not argument, but awareness, not knowledge, but knowing, the quiet recognition of divine presence in all things, even in uncertainty. Solomon's wisdom is not anti-thought. It is anti-idolatry of thought. The difference is everything. The proud scholar says, I will know all. The wise man says, I will be known by the one who knows all. And in that reversal lies salvation. For to be known by God is to be anchored beyond confusion, even when questions remain unanswered, even when life defies logic. There is rest in the awareness that the same mind which framed the stars holds your days in perfect order. What need have you then to understand every detail? Trust is the bridge between ignorance and peace, and it is built not by explanation but by surrender. I have seen this truth revealed in vision, that the soul grows luminous not by collecting more knowledge but by releasing its fear of not knowing. Ignorance of mystery is not sin. Rebellion against it is. For rebellion is the refusal to let God be God, the refusal to let light remain light without dissecting it. Solomon, weary from his search, laid down his crown of intellect and took up the mantle of humility. He learned that wisdom is not the possession of the mind, but the posture of the heart. He looked upon all his inquiries, his observations, his philosophy, and he said, this too is vapor, not because it was false, but because it was finite. Every truth of man is but a shadow of the greater truth that dwells beyond words. So I tell you now, study, learn, inquire, explore the mysteries of creation. But build your foundation not on your findings, but on your faith. For when knowledge fails, faith endures. When logic falters, love remains. And when all understanding ceases, the light of God still burns, silent and sufficient, guiding those who trust more than they know. And it is better to walk humbly in that light than to wander proudly in darkness, carrying the torch of your own intellect. For the torch will die, but the light will never fade. I speak now as one who has looked long into the scroll of human understanding and seen its edges vanish into mystery. For Solomon, the son of David, the teacher of Israel, declared that with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and I have found it to be so. The mind of man hungers to know. It gathers facts as bees gather nectar, and yet the sweetness turns bitter when knowledge is severed from reverence. For knowledge without God becomes a burden upon the soul. The heart grows weary beneath the weight of understanding that cannot heal, and the eye that sees too much forgets how to see simply. Solomon himself, though clothed in wisdom beyond any of his age, came to the end of his search and said, "No man can find out what God has done from beginning to end." He had read the stars, he had studied the order of creation, he had spoken with sages, and yet the greater his knowing, the deeper his ache. Because the mystery did not shrink before him, it expanded. It surrounded him like a vast sea, and he realized that the finite mind cannot contain the infinite, even as a cup cannot contain the ocean. I too have stood at that shore, seeing visions of truth stretching beyond sight, and I knew that man's intellect, mighty though it seems, is but a candle flickering in the wind of eternity. Yet this realization is not despair, it is deliverance, for the spirit is freed. The moment it ceases to demand mastery over mystery, the soul finds peace when it bows before what it cannot command. Solomon did not condemn learning. He sanctified it by putting it in its rightful place. He said, "Seek wisdom, but remember the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord," meaning awe, humility, alignment, the kind of reverence that makes the mind clear because it knows its limits. Many in our day mistake the accumulation of information for illumination, but knowledge is not light. It is a mirror, and without truth shining upon it, it reflects only confusion. The teacher saw that the pursuit of wisdom for its own glory leads to madness, for man begins to think himself equal with his Maker, building towers of thought as high as Babel, and when the tower falls, he calls it tragedy, yet it was mercy that it should fall. For pride is the oldest blindness, and curiosity, without devotion, is the road to emptiness. I have seen this written in the Akashic records of the soul, that those who worship the mind alone are forever circling the same questions, like moths trapped around a flame. They grow weary of mystery and yet cannot live without it. They hunger for certainty, though their hunger was meant to lead them to faith. Solomon's grief was not that he knew too much, but that he knew he could never know enough. The more he learned, the more he saw the shadows between the facts, the places where reason dissolves into wonder, where logic kneels before creation, and in that humility he found the beginning of peace. I tell you, the teacher's lament is our liberation. For to accept the limit of knowing is to enter the boundlessness of trust. Man was not made to be omniscient. He was made to be obedient to light, and light is always enough for the next step, not the entire path. God gives to each soul the knowledge it can bear, and holds the rest in silence, not as cruelty, but as protection, for there is wisdom too heavy for pride and truth too sharp for the unprepared heart. This is why the wise walk softly. They do not boast of what they know. They bow to what they do not. They speak with caution, knowing that revelation is not possession, it is visitation, a gift that comes and goes according to the law of divine timing. Solomon wrote that he applied his mind to know wisdom and also to understand madness and folly, but he learned that this too was chasing after the wind, for wisdom alone could not untangle the riddles of existence. Every answer led to another question. Every discovery opened another abyss, and he saw that peace cannot be built on explanation, only on relationship. For knowledge seeks control, but love seeks communion, and only communion with the divine can quiet the storm of thought. I have known seekers who filled their shelves with sacred books and their minds with doctrines, yet their hearts remained empty because they studied truth as one studies a specimen, not as one meets a friend. Truth is not to be dissected, but to be lived. It is not the conquest of the intellect, but the surrender of the spirit. Solomon's cry echoes across the ages, reminding us that the human mind is a servant, not a master. It was given to perceive patterns, not to replace purpose. It was made to reason within faith, not apart from it. Those who build their faith on intellect alone will find themselves dwelling among ruins. For when the winds of contradiction blow, their towers crumble. But those who trust in God stand firm, because their foundation is not argument, but awareness, not knowledge, but knowing, the quiet recognition of divine presence in all things, even in uncertainty. Solomon's wisdom is not anti-thought, it is anti-idolatry of thought. The difference is everything. The proud scholar says, I will know all. The wise man says, I will be known by the one who knows all. And in that reversal lies salvation. For to be known by God is to be anchored beyond confusion. Even when questions remain unanswered, even when life defies logic, there is rest in the awareness that the same mind which framed the stars holds your days in perfect order. What need have you then to understand every detail? Trust is the bridge between ignorance and peace, and it is built not by explanation but by surrender. I have seen this truth revealed in vision, that the soul grows luminous not by collecting more knowledge but by releasing its fear of not knowing. Ignorance of mystery is not sin. Rebellion against it is. For rebellion is the refusal to let God be God, the refusal to let light remain light without dissecting it. Solomon, weary from his search, laid down his crown of intellect and took up the mantle of humility. He learned that wisdom is not the possession of the mind, but the posture of the heart. He looked upon all his inquiries, his observations, his philosophy, and he said, this too is vapor, not because it was false, but because it was finite. Every truth of man is but a shadow of the greater truth that dwells beyond words. So I tell you now, study, learn, inquire, explore the mysteries of creation, but build your foundation not on your findings, but on your faith. For when knowledge fails, faith endures. When logic falters, love remains. And when all understanding ceases, the light of God still burns, silent and sufficient, guiding those who trust more than they know. And it is better to walk humbly in that light than to wander proudly in darkness, carrying the torch of your own intellect. For the torch will die, but the light will never fade. Do not be over-righteous, Solomon warned, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. For whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. These words have puzzled many, and yet they contain one of the deepest truths ever spoken. The human heart swings like a pendulum, from pride to despair, from indulgence to asceticism, from self-worship to self-hatred. Wisdom stands not in the swing, but in the stillness at the center. Solomon understood that holiness is balance, that virtue without humility becomes poison, and freedom without restraint becomes ruin. The righteous man who trusts his own purity is as lost as the sinner who glories in rebellion. Both have made themselves gods, one through pride, the other through defiance. The wise man sees that both paths lead to the same abyss. For excess in any form is the corruption of order. He knew that the world, in all its beauty and pain, demands equilibrium, not extremity. To live rightly is not to flee the world, nor to devour it, but to eat its bread with gratitude, to drink its wine with awareness, to work and rest, to laugh and mourn, to act and to wait, each in its season, and all under God's eye. I have seen many souls break themselves on the rocks of excess, some in the name of religion, others in the name of pleasure. The zealot who demands perfection destroys compassion. The libertine who rejects restraint destroys meaning. But the one who fears God walks in harmony with both mercy and law. He accepts that life is a dance between opposites. Too much light blinds, too much darkness kills. Solomon had learned this from experience, for he had pursued both extremes. He had built temples of gold, and later idols of vanity. He had chased wisdom until it turned to weariness, and pleasure until it turned to dust. And in the end he saw that all extremes spring from the same wound, the fear of incompleteness. Man seeks excess because he cannot bear the middle ground, where humility lives. Yet it is only in that middle ground that peace grows. Moderation is not mediocrity. It is mastery. It is the art of living in rhythm with reality, to grasp one without letting go of the other, to know joy without addiction, sorrow without despair, knowledge without arrogance, faith without blindness. This is the path of balance, and it requires more courage than any extremity. For balance demands awareness, and awareness is always uncomfortable. Solomon saw that self-righteousness is a subtler sin than open wickedness. For the self-righteous man cloaks his pride in virtue. He mistakes his opinions for divine law, his discipline for divine approval. He becomes unteachable, unyielding, unable to see the God who dwells beyond his doctrines, and thus he falls into the most tragic illusion of all, believing he serves heaven while serving only himself. This is why Solomon warns, do not be over-righteous, not because righteousness is evil, but because man, in his vanity, twists even holiness into vanity. When you begin to measure your worth by your goodness, you have already turned from grace. The same pride that builds temples can crucify truth. Solomon's antidote was fear of God, which means the awareness that no man stands as judge in the presence of the eternal, that all righteousness, all wisdom, all virtue are gifts on loan from the source, and therefore not possessions to boast of. He saw that humility, not performance, is the sign of true faith. Humility is the balance between self-denial and self-obsession. It neither exalts nor despises. It simply sees. The fool, on the other hand, rejects all restraint. Mistaking recklessness for freedom, he throws away discipline, calling it oppression. And in his rebellion, he loses the dignity that freedom was meant to protect. The wise man avoids both errors. He does not worship rules nor scorn them. He follows them as one follows the rhythm of breathing, naturally, effortlessly, because they align him with the divine order. Balance is not weakness. It is wisdom in motion, the tightrope between heaven and earth. Solomon's words reach beyond morality into metaphysics, for all creation is sustained by balance, the orbit of planets, the pulse of the heart, the rise and fall of tides, the inhale and exhale of breath. Imbalance is the beginning of decay, harmony, the essence of life. Man who is made in the image of the Creator must live by that same law. When he leans too far toward either extreme, he falls into distortion. One side destroys the body, the other destroys the soul. Both rob him of peace. I have seen how the pursuit of perfection becomes its own idolatry. The holy man who despises laughter, the scholar who despises mystery, the ascetic who despises pleasure. Each has mistaken control for sanctity. But God's order is not control, it is communion. To walk humbly with your God means to move within limits freely, to know that your freedom exists not outside the law, but within it, as the bird flies not by escaping the air, but by moving through it. Solomon's wisdom was born not of theory, but of failure. He tasted both righteousness and sin, both wisdom and folly, and found that neither could save him without humility. His warning is not to discourage striving, but to purify it, to remind the seeker that even virtue must bow before grace, that even wisdom must yield to wonder. The middle path he describes is not dull compromise, but divine alignment, the narrow way Christ would later echo, where the soul walks, unburdened by extremes, able to receive both joy and sorrow as instruments of growth. For to cling to one and flee the other is to reject half of God's teaching. Solomon's call is the call of equilibrium, to live with passion but without possession, to seek truth but without pride, to serve others but without martyrdom, to enjoy blessings but without addiction. The one who walks this path shines with quiet strength, for he has nothing to prove and nothing to defend. He knows that holiness is not in excess but in harmony, not in austerity but in awareness. When he prays, he does not demand. He listens. When he acts, he does not boast. He serves. When he speaks, he does not argue. He reveals. This is what it means to avoid all extremes. Not withdrawal from life, but fullness of life, rightly ordered. Under the sun, extremes are glorified because they create noise. But under God, silence holds power, balance holds beauty, and humility holds authority. Solomon teaches us that righteousness without mercy becomes tyranny, wisdom without love becomes cruelty, and freedom without boundaries becomes chaos. Therefore, he concludes that to fear God is to live in balance, to revere the law yet rejoice in grace, to walk neither in excess of virtue nor in indulgence of vice, but in the radiant center where truth and love are one. And in that center man finds rest, not the rest of idleness, but of integration, where the heart no longer swings between pride and despair, but beats steady with the rhythm of eternity.